Hello, and welcome to this month's episode of A Seat at the Table, a show to keep you connected and informed about what's happening in your capital city. I'm your host, State Representative Sarah Anthony, and I'm proud to serve as your voice in the state legislature. The theme of today's episode is Into the Weeds on recreational marijuana. In November of 2018, Michigan voters overwhelmingly passed Proposal 1, legalizing adult use or recreational marijuana. Joining us today is Andrew Brisbo, who is the Executive Director of Michigan's Marijuana Regulatory Agency. Director, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
So tell us a little bit about your role as the Executive Director of we call MRA. So
Sure.
What is some of your primary roles and responsibilities?
So our agency centralizes all functions for marijuana oversight in the state. I think what we saw in other states, they often had the responsibility split, but everything marijuana related is done in our agency in Michigan. So we still have the registry program for patients and caregivers that's still in place. We continue to issue those registry cards, and now we oversee facility licensing on the medical side and establishment licensing in the adult use program. So we perform all those licensing functions, and we also have policy-making responsibilities with the administrative rules process as well.
How big is your team?
We are growing to about 150 staff. We're not quite there yet, but that's our cap, and we're almost there.
Wow. And I think that's an important distinction as we have our conversation about both the medical use and the adult or the recreational. So I know a lot of folks get those kind of mixed up, or, we've had the medical for quite some time now. So we're just now getting into the recreational phase. So.
Right, and we've had the medical program where you could grow at home and use caregivers or patients for over 10 years now in Michigan, up to 12 years since 2008. The commercial side of that, though, where we actually licensed facilities for commercial cultivation and sales and transport and testing, really just started in 2016, 2017. So that whole process, the commercial side of it, is fairly new even in the medical market.
That's right. And I will say Lansing in mid-Michigan has really been ground zero, I think, for many things, whether it's been medical, now recreational. And I know that you are from mid-Michigan area.
I am.
And proud Chippewa, which
Absolutely.
I am as well. So it's nice to have you kind of at the helm and to have like a local perspective at the state level. So thanks for the work you're doing.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit. So I serve on the Appropriations Committee for LARA and for DIFs. And so we have some oversight on this industry, which is probably one of the reasons why I was appointed to this committee.
Right.
Talk a little bit about the legislative climate around marijuana and how some of the changes at the state level have impacted the work that you're doing.
Sure. So I've often said as part of our mission, we are committed to outreach, education, and collaboration. And I think that's true not only for the citizens of the state and the industry itself, but also on the legislative side as well. So I focused a lot of energy on keeping legislators in the loop on what we're doing. It's a very interesting topic. It can be a very politicized topic, particularly depending on what area of the state you're from. So I think it's been important for us to over-communicate and be good partners with the legislature, because this is a quickly evolving industry, and there will be changes that are necessary as the industry moves ahead and we look at some of the new developments and determine how do we need to regulate that? Can it be done by rule, or do we need statutory changes? So I think those have been very positive conversations. It's sort of apolitical in the sense that I think everyone sees what's happening. They see the will of the voters to move this forward and wants to be part of the conversation when it comes to what solutions might be necessary to remove some of those hurdles and some of the burden in allowing the industry to succeed in the state.
That's right. And one question that I am asked often is the role of the state versus the role of local units of government, right? Cities, townships, etc. Can you talk a little bit about your role in the number of dispensaries or the number of shops that are in local communities? I'm from South Lansing, and we saw a high concentration of pot shops, and many neighbors were just not super thrilled about the number of them that were, particularly in low-income communities, communities that just have that are just struggling a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about what the state's role versus the local role is, and just in determining the amount, the number, the location, et cetera?
And I often use a Lansing-based example when I would do presentations and speeches about how this has evolved. There was a point in time, if you stood at the corner of South Cedar and Holmes Road, you could see had to be at least 6 dispensaries just by spinning in a circle. So, those concentrations, and that was present in a lot of communities in the state. So when the legislature passed the Act in 2016, and that local control element was a part of it, and that was honored by the voters in 2018 with the ballot initiative as well, that municipalities get to decide if they want facilities or not. They make that decision, and the state can't overrule that. And they also get to determine how many of the facilities they want as well. And many municipalities have taken that step, at least on the retail side, to decide how many retail establishments they want. And the state's role then is to ultimately issue the state license and provide oversight and regulatory compliance for those facilities. We sort of set the standards for operations, but municipalities can fill in the gaps. If we don't have a state law or a regulation that deals with a certain topics, the municipalities can do that. They just can't have any ordinances that conflict with the state level program.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for answering that.
Sure.
So another question that I'm personally very passionate about is social equity. So I know that at the state level, there's been some intentional conversations and actions around making sure that communities that have been disproportionately impacted by law enforcement and that intersection between the fact that this has been an illegal drug for as far as forever. Yeah. And, making sure that there's social equity in in all pieces of this work, right? So who's actually getting the licenses, who's working at these places. Can you talk a little bit about what the state has done to really embed a social equity lens?
Right. So we met with several stakeholder work groups before we implemented the law, and one of the primary discussions was around social equity. So he had the mandate in the voter-initiated law to have a social equity program to benefit those disproportionately impacted communities. So a lot of the conversation was around how do we identify them and what services do we offer. I think one of the challenges is we don't have a pot of money, as some other states have had, to give low-interest loans or any sort of grant funding. So we focus a lot on education and outreach. Again, that's one of the cornerstones of our program and our agency. And so we have some dedicated staff that work in those communities that provide educational programs, and now we're really starting to work with applicants and licensees who are social equity qualifiers one-on-one to ensure they understand the process. There's a reduction in fees that's available to them, educating them on that, and connecting them with resources where they might not necessarily have the capital to be able to pay for an attorney or a CPA or a consultant who typically works in this industry. But we are one aspect of that. We've also been focused on helping to educate municipalities on the role they can play. We've seen a lot of municipalities including social equity as part of their local approval process. And then we also require all licensees to have their own social equity plan. I think they are critical in ensuring that the industry itself has a focus on equity and how they can involve people. And that's not just having a license and owning an establishment, but it's also providing opportunities in other ways, such as jobs, to individuals who come from these communities.
That's right. And I see so many people. I mean, the industry's so big, right? It's all the ancillary businesses, right? It's the accounting firms. It's transporting. It's all of those pieces. And I think that when people look at the industry, sometimes they just see the store right on their corner, as opposed to all the other pieces, and making sure that there is, equity and inclusion in all of those. So that's an exciting piece. Yes. I'm glad that was kind of baked in, and I hope that local communities across the state really take that seriously and really look at how they can be more inclusive.
Right, and we built the program so it can be flexible and evolve as well. So we did a lot of large presentations in communities, but found that we quickly needed to transition to a more one-on-one approach to work directly with applicants. That's the help that they needed. So we are constantly engaging with the communities, understanding what their needs are, and we can have a flexible approach by community and also overall on how we implement the program. Yeah,
that's awesome. I want to pivot a little bit about just another question that I'm asked by constituents a lot. It's around operating a vehicle high, right? So under the influence of marijuana. How has law enforcement started to deal with that, and what advice are you giving to stakeholders who are particularly interested in that piece? So making sure that folks are not putting other drivers in danger by being under the influence.
And that is a challenging conversation, because when you have these laws that pivot rather quickly, you have all of this infrastructure in place that's used to dealing with this issue in a singular way. And there have been some pilot programs run by MSP to look for, say, a roadside breathalyzers or something that's analogous to a roadside breathalyzer for alcohol to measure impairment. And honestly, we haven't seen much progress in that way throughout the country yet. So all states are dealing with that issue, and that is a challenging one, how you measure impairment versus use, because it is legal to use and possess now, but you're not supposed to be impaired. So I think there's a lot more to be done there. I think there need to be some changes at the federal level to support some research that might be necessary in order to bridge that gap.
Good. Yeah. So, taking things up a little bit in terms of the timeline. So we knew, was it December 1st? That what was so where are we at in terms of our timeline in terms of implementation of adult use recreation in Michigan?
So we started taking applications November 1st, which was a full month ahead of the statutory mandate to start taking those applications. And then we started to allow sales, limited sales for those facilities that held licenses in both markets, medical and adult use, to transfer some of their inventory to the adult use market to make some sales beginning December 1st. So we're up over 50 licensed establishments on the adult use side now, 26 of which are retailers, and we've seen over $8 million in sales so far just since the beginning of December. So we're really just at the beginning, though. Yeah. We saw the medical side of it grow over time, and it took about 2 years to have sort of a fully functioning infrastructure where we're starting to have availability across the state and starting to get close to meeting demand, and it's going to take even more time because the demand on the adult use side far exceeds that on the medical side. So I think everyone wants things to happen overnight, but the reality is we're starting from the ground up to build this, so it's going to take some time to get there. And slowly but surely we see municipalities starting to opt in as well, but a number of them don't allow facilities yet. So in terms of access throughout the state, municipalities play a critical role in ensuring that there's regulated access for consumers throughout the state.
Wow. Right. And how many currently, you may not have this off the top of your head, but do you know how many in Lansing have been approved?
I don't think any in Lansing have been approved yet. I think Lansing's still working through their ordinance on the adult use side.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. So you are probably asked all the time, so you go across the state, you do presentations, you meet with stakeholders. What are some things that you would like just regular citizens who may be watching to know about this budding industry?
Love the play on words. I think everyone, as I said before, needs to exercise some patience in allowing the industry to grow, to provide availability of products through the regulated market. Ultimately, we want consumers to use the regulated market. There are testing standards, there are operational standards that can ensure they're getting the safest possible products through the regulated market. But I think citizens also need to know that there are some restrictions. I get asked all the time, so does this mean now I can just walk down the street smoking a joint and No, it doesn't. I think it's important to know what the possession limits look like. If you choose to grow at home, which both the medical and adult use laws allow, you need to know under what circumstances, how much you can grow to ensure you stay on the right side of things. So it's not quite, I think, the free-for-all that it gets perceived to be. There are still some restrictions in place. And I just encourage consumers to be educated. If they choose to use marijuana products, to do so carefully. If you're a medical patient, you should consult with your physician before you start using any sort of treatment mechanism. So I think it's important still to look at the information, to be educated, and if you're going to consume products, use them through the regulated market.
Awesome. And where can folks go to contact you or just for more information from your department?
Michigan.gov/MRA. That's our single point for all resources.
Excellent. I'm pretty sure that all of my viewers are going to have many questions, and so they're just going to inundate you. So, but you've always been really responsive to our office. So thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you for being here. And so if you have questions, be sure to contact Andrew's office. And thank you for taking the time to be on the show today and for the work that you're doing. When we return after this short break, we will be joined by our city clerk, Chris Swope.
They told me a bottle couldn't dream. That I would never become a superhero. But I learned how to fly. Just to come back in a new disguise and be the hero that I've always wanted to be.
How do I take the 2020 census? In March 2020, every address in the country will receive an invitation to complete a simple questionnaire. And there are 3 ways to respond. Number 1, do it online. Number 2, call by phone. Number 3, send it by mail. For those who don't respond, a census taker from your community will follow up and assist you. Shape your future. Start here. Visit 2020census.gov.
Welcome back to A Seat at the Table. Today we're discussing the implementation of adult use marijuana and the impact it has on the Lansing community. here to give us the local perspective, we have none other than our very own Chris Swope, who serves as our city clerk. Thank you for joining us, Clerk.
And thank you for having me.
So you're my favorite clerk.
Oh, that's so
I
sweet.
always say this, city clerk. And you have spent 14 years in this role.
Yes.
And before that, you were a county commissioner. So thank you for your service, first of all. And thank you for always really being on the cutting edge of what's happening, either with adult use marijuana, which probably when you first started, you did not think this would be in your wheelhouse.
I never thought in my life that I would be in the business of regulating marijuana.
Yes, I mean, but here we are. And, you know, we talked about in the last segment that whether it was Proposal 1 with adult use or even the innovative changes with voting in Proposal 3, you have probably had a very busy last couple of years.
There's been a lot of change in the last couple of years. Yes, definitely.
We appreciate you being so innovative and always willing to spread the word about voting rights, but also about this industry, this marijuana industry. So what role do you specifically play here in Lansing around the licensing and just the entire industry of marijuana?
Well, we determine who gets a license, and really it's a very complicated process that our city council put in the ordinance. First with the medical side, we had a cap of 25 that had to be given out in 2 phases. We had this very complicated scoring system that was built right into the ordinance of how I had to determine who would get those licenses. We're still wrapping up phase 2 of that for the last 5 medical licenses. And then on the recreational side, City Council adopted a new ordinance this past fall that actually kind of frees my hands in terms of how I do the scoring and some of the other aspects, but it is still a very complex process. Involves scoring all of these, looking at very complex details of applications, and determining who gets a good enough score to be allowed into the industry.
Yeah, and it's not just you, right? Isn't there a board as well that kind of helps some of this process come along?
There is an appeals board that actually was eliminated in the new ordinance. So those that applied under the old ordinance are still going through that appeals process. If I don't grant them a license, they have the right to appeal to the commission. But under the newly adopted, and so for the adult use, they appeal back to me, and then their avenue beyond that would be in the courts.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Thanks for clearing that up. So oftentimes, especially with my colleagues in the legislature, they often look to Lansing, right, as, I don't want to say ground zero or the Wild Wild West, or just like a community that has really had multiple changes and iterations, be it with this new adult use, but also medical.
Right.
Talk to me a little bit about, you know, how far we've come, right, and what Lansing, all the different iterations that we've seen here locally.
Right. We've seen some huge swings. You know, we at one point had an estimated 85 to 90 dispensaries on the medical side. It was not very regulated, and state law at the time was unclear exactly what was permitted and what wasn't permitted. So, you know, the previous administration, the mayor just kind of let them operate until the state law was clear about what should be regulated and what could be regulated on the medical side, and then Lansing followed up with an ordinance. So, you know, that Wild West definitely gave patient access, so that was a positive, and it gave an opportunity for us to kind of see, you know, what the extreme could be on the number of them, and I think it gave City Council a lot of ideas about what they wanted to see and not see in the industry. And I don't agree with every decision that our City Council has made, but I think we are poised to have a really strong industry. You know, the applications that we approved in phase 1, the first 20, detailed over $80 million of investment in buildings and infrastructure in the city of Lansing, and over 2,000 jobs. So it's really an industry that's growing and has the potential to produce a lot of benefits for the city.
Yeah, yeah, and you never hear those stats, right?
Right.
You just
Right.
don't. I mean, you probably hear a lot of things. Like, what are some of the most common questions or comments from people in Michigan or people in Lansing, right? You know, you and I go to the neighborhood meetings and the town halls. What do you
Right.
hear from folks?
Mostly, when are they going to have access to adult use is what the public asks. We get actually a lot more questions from applicants and people who want to be in the industry too, who just want details. But you know, people have concerns about how it's going to impact them. I was surprised to read a study recently that actually shows that cities that allow adult use marijuana, home values go up by an average of over $20,000.
Wow.
Yeah, I was really surprised to see that.
Wow. Yeah, that is a shocking statistic. You
yes.
don't hear it.
No.
You don't hear it. So how many retail shops, you alluded to this a little bit earlier, but how many retail shops in Lansing are we expecting as a result of adult use?
Well, our city council put a cap of 28 retail locations.
Okay.
So that will be the regular retail, and then there are what's called micro businesses where they can grow a small number of plants and sell in the same location. We'll have one per ward, so that's 32, and then there's the lounges where people can use it but not purchase it, and we'll have 4 of those as well, one in each ward.
Okay. Okay. And, you know, for the retail shops, is there any, you know, one thing I heard when I was talking to folks just in neighborhoods is the kind of concentration of, you know, in different pockets of Lansing. So whether it's the south side or the east side, you know, is there any thought to where the shops will be able to be located, or is it just wherever they can find space?
Well, they had to be along commercial corridors. You know, they were restricted to particular zoning types. We have found that the north half of the city and the east half tend to have more locations that are going to be viable, you know, and a lot of it gets into the scoring and what spaces were available. So, you know, I think the third ward is the one lacking in the number of dispensaries, although there are some that are right on the border of the third ward. But if you look at a map, it's relatively spread out through most of the city, and we do have regulations that they can't be within 500 feet of each other, each dispensary.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's good. That's good. I hear about that a lot.
Yes.
So, absolutely. Yes. So are there any local regulations or ordinances where, so you just talked a little bit about this, but what else should, I guess, the residents know about what's coming, right? Should they tune into city council meetings? Should they contact your office to kind of get an idea of where shops are coming? If folks wanted to really dig deep into what the industry might look like in Lansing, where do folks go to get information?
Well, we do keep an updated list of who has applied and who's been approved by us on our website from my office, so people can know. And you know, right now, what would be listed as medical marijuana dispensary, since we are capped at the 28 locations, they can be co-located, so many of those will likely end up being adult use as well. So that gives you a pretty good idea of where the industry is going in the city. And then, you know, we will just keep making that information as public as we can.
Good. And this may be a little outside of your wheelhouse, but I have around the city started to see billboards and promotions around kind of the health and safety piece around marijuana. So I think some of them may be through the health department or even through the state that just talk about some of the misconceptions, right, around driving, around the, you know, how old you need to be in order to consume, all of those kind of public health and public safety pieces. So I think people should take note of that as well, right?
Right, and you know, there is I think a need for some additional information about what the impacts are. I mean, we don't have local regulations on driving under the influence, so that's a state level issue. But you know, I think there's a lack of enough information about what is impaired driving under marijuana, because for so long, you know, it wasn't allowed to even
right.
study what the impacts were.
That's right.
So now we're still learning. We're behind the curve, I think.
Yeah, and a big part of Proposal 1 was around studying. So
Right.
at the Appropriations Committee level, we've talked about how Michigan State University and some of the other partners have been really deputized to study the impacts, to study how helpful it is to several, health concerns and ailments, and just what it looks
Right,
like,
right.
because we just don't know.
Right. We need to know what the positive and negative impacts are.
That's right. That's right. And I just say that we're so blessed in mid-Michigan that we have a university like Michigan State University. We have, this community that has really taken some proactive steps of making sure that the industry looks a certain way. I think our city council has been pretty proactive, and, we can argue about the bits and pieces, but I do think that the city has done a good job in looking at that. You would probably know this better than others. When I was talking to the director, we talked about social equity and how communities are looking at that. And I know one thing he talked about was that each individual city is kind of looking at it with their own spin, that there have been built in at the state level, but ultimately still cities and townships can do what they can to make sure that it's embedded. What is the city doing around social equity?
Well, that's really been a little bit of a tough issue for us because part of the social equity thing was a history of enforcement within a municipality. And when the state looked at it, they didn't find that the city of Lansing qualified under their social equity guidelines. So
I get asked all the time because East Lansing does. And
Right.
so when folks look at the demographics of the communities, it's often
right.
right.
But
baffling,
for this topic, it relates more directly to the history of enforcement within a jurisdiction
That's
rather than who's living in a jurisdiction.
Right.
So we're in a little bit of a tough spot, and it was discussed at our city council. I've had numerous discussions. I meet weekly with 1 to 2 attorneys regarding this, and it's been a topic several times trying to figure out what we can do. And unfortunately, because we don't have that history or a track record that there has been an issue, our hands are a little bit tied.
Yeah. Well, I am always, if you ever watch any of our appropriations meetings about this topic, I am always hammering down about making sure that, it's included, that social equity is embedded at the state level,
Right.
and that we're looking at it in local communities. So.
And the state level is really where there's more, when you look at the licensing fees at the state level compared to what's at the city level, it's a lot bigger charge. It's a lot bigger hill to climb at the state level than it actually is for the city.
Yeah. Well, I plan on being a vocal ally in all of
great.
this work at the state level, and anything I can be doing to help and support the local, I will definitely do so.
I appreciate you.
Yes. And thank you for being on. We appreciate the time. So, and I'm afraid we're out of time, but I just wanted to thank both of my guests, so Andrew Brisbo and Chris Swope. This show would not have been possible without your expertise. So thank you again. And thank you all for watching. We appreciate it. And remember, my team and I is here to serve you. So do not hesitate to contact my office if I can ever be of assistance. So until next time, thank you for watching, and love Lansing.